So we're thinking about potentially positive well-to-well interference also. So we're thinking about potentially positive well-to-well interference, negative well-to-well interference, not necessarily, just the concept of filling up your well bore with sand, but just how this, how the wells are interacting in the subsurface.
Yep, yeah, that's right. And there's lots of different ways that you can think about frac hits, whether it's production degradation to a parent well or infill child development not being as expected due to maybe completing in a depleted zone, or just well-to-well interference with sibling wells during zipper fracs. So what we wanted to dig in today was looking at these parent wells that have been producing for a number of years that later had child wells infilling them, and then really digging into the details of, was there a frac hit? Did we see a significant production degradation? Did the well recover? And then making some production forecast pre and post infill development and looking at that production response, and then taking it a step further and actually quantifying the net present value before and after infill development.
Yeah, so the logic is that, of course, we're thinking about the capital budget and the return profile of infill wells, but there might have been, our thesis, our hypothesis is that there was an unpriced cost in the economic degradation of the parent once these infill wells come online. And so it's still, there are many scenarios where doing the infill child development makes absolute economic sense. We just need to be thinking about this NPV impact to the parent that's going from an unbounded well to becoming a bounded well.
All right, so let's dive in, Richard. I know you wanted to share a few slides on what Petro.ai is for those that might not be familiar.
Sure. So I think most attendees understand this pain. They're, because of the nature of how digital deliverables are put in front of us, it ends up being held in different file formats, different systems that were all designed to view, these single types, these single data types. And so in order to build a holistic view, in order to build a single view of the subsurface, you have to amalgamate all these different data types together. And so that data manipulation work ends up taking an outsized percentage of your time when you should be doing more knowledge work and not data manipulation work. And so what Petro.ai is able to do is automatically categorize these different data types against one another and give users a single interface to query these different data types, where everything's been contextualized in 3D space in the subsurface, along laterals in a wellbore, and so on. And the result is that you're spending far less time doing this data manipulation work and doing more knowledge work. And so we call that concept connected energy analytics. And you'll see plenty of examples today as Kyle's clicking through our toolkit, where we can jump from one view to another, where traditionally you would have needed to move from one software to another. And so the three bullet points that we really hang on are: we want to empower people to do their most important work. We want to enhance processes with modern software, and then consolidating technology for G&A savings. So instead of using 10% functionality from many different tools that don't connect together, our guess is that it makes more sense to consolidate into one piece of technology that allows you to do more work through a single interface.
All right, thanks, Richard. So next we'll jump into the goals, what we want to accomplish today. And I'm actually going to turn off my video just to make sure that the slides are taking up the full screen. Okay. So what we wanted to focus on today, like we mentioned a few minutes ago, is looking at the reserves and economic degradation of parent wells during infill development. So we'll show you how Petro.ai can explore these interconnected relationships of well groups and look at the spacing, development, production, and economics, and do that in a single system where you can quickly look at the well spacing, look at well relationships, look at the decline curves, run economics on everything. And what we really want to focus on is just demonstrating a workflow that Petro.ai can perform today. So everything that we're going to be clicking through is inside Petro.ai. We've set up this analysis to show that we can have a thesis on looking for these parent wells that might have production impact, but really taking it through several steps of that workflow. So going from the production, looking at the frac hits potentially on a well, taking it to a decline curve analysis, and then running economics on everything. And at the end, we'll summarize this for one pad that we found that was really interesting. We'll summarize the NPV and the reserves impact of a frac kit. So we'll be using several different apps within Petro.ai. One is called the Frac Kit Scenario. So with the Frac Kit Scenario, this is where we can calculate well-to-well spacing. We can look at the production differences between wells. We can look at wells by pad. We can determine offset wells, classify parent-child sibling relationships. So we'll be spending some time looking at the Frac Kit Scenario. And then we'll run a forecast scenario on a given well. And with that forecast scenario, we can create a pre and post infill development decline curve. And then based on those two different decline curves, we can run economics on both of them and look at the NPV and the production impacts of this frac kit. We'll also spend a few minutes looking at Petro Earth. So Petro Earth is our fully immersive 3D explorer where you can visualize all of your subsurface data in one location.
Yeah, that's a piece that we're really excited to share, and that's new in the latest version of Petro.ai. And so we're really excited to hear folks' reactions to this new addition.
So the area of focus for today, we're in the Delaware Basin, specifically in Loving County. And if we think about Loving County as a good use case, there's lots of wells that have been drilled over the last 10 or 15 years, horizontal wells. And then there's quite a bit of infill development that's happened, which you can see just by looking at this map. But there's also several locations where we still have parent wells that are completely unbounded that might be targets for later infill development. So what we want to look at is these pads where a parent well was holding the lease by production maybe, and then a couple years later had infill development, which could be a good analog for some of these other pads you see on the east side where there's just a single well holding the lease. It might have a similar production response when you start infilling those pads.
No, well said. And then the last piece that we'll add here is that this data was provided to us by TGS, which we're happy to share, and we're very proud of our partnership with TGS. But Petro.ai is data agnostic, so we can connect to other data sources as well. So we could connect to IHS or to drilling info or to internal systems and present that through a single view with Petro.ai.
So we'll spend a lot of time inside Petro.ai clicking around and showing this workflow, but just to point out some of the key features before we dive in, starting with the Frac Kit Scenario, this is the tool that we can use to calculate well spacing in 3 dimensions. So we calculate the vertical offsets, the horizontal offsets, and then the well-to-well distances. We can also have input controls to define what we consider parent, child, and sibling relationships. So for a given well, you can see all of its child wells, all of its parent wells, and any wells that were completed within the same time period. And then you've got control over not only the parent-child classification, but also the spacing considerations for flagging those offset wells. And then you can interact with these wells in 2 dimensions, looking at different map views, gun barrel views, and also we've got a couple of different ways to visualize the wells in 3 dimensions. And then ultimately what we want to do is calculate the frac kit production response. So if you notice that there was a frac kit, you see a significant production response, being able to quantify the actual difference between the well's performance before and after. So the data types required for this particular app, pretty straightforward. We've got well header, monthly production, and wellbore surveys. We've also incorporated a stress map, which has the location and orientation of SH max. That will be important for identifying the directions that the fracs are likely to propagate. We can also enhance the analysis by bringing in horizon grids. If you have horizon grids, we'll automatically classify the landing zone for each well and tell you the percent end zone, so distance from top to bottom of the formations above and below it. And then you can really get into the pressure response if you bring in wellhead and bottom hole pressures for the offset wells, as well as the high frequency production rates.
And then the last piece that I'll share is on that stress map. If you have an internal stress map that you'd prefer to use rather than the default Lund, SNE, Zobac map that we use, we're happy to incorporate an internal stress map as well.
Yep, so it can be, we can blend the two together or we can use one or the other. So if we think about calculating well spacing, there's quite a few inputs that or assumptions that can go into it when you're thinking about, what do I consider an offset well? How far apart do they need to be? What do I consider a child well, a parent well? So in the Frac app, we've got the flexibility of setting all of these input parameters. And you can think about a box or an ellipsoid around a wellbore. We've got inputs to control the max vertical distance and the max horizontal distance for classifying offset wells. So if a well is within this threshold and it meets the days offset criteria, which we'll show in the next slide, it's going to pick it up as an offset well, calculate the well-to-well distances, and then classify it as a parent, child, or sibling.
And so we think this is really important, that you're not getting parent-child classifications as a service, but rather a user can change the assumptions that went into building those classifications and then run different scenarios with different assumptions, increasing that vertical distance, decreasing the horizontal distance. We think that's really powerful functionality. And then the other piece here is that we're not looking, so for the horizontal frac propagation distance, we're not looking in a direction perpendicular to the wellbore, but rather we're looking in the direction of SH max, which would be the direction that fracs propagate. And that's another really important distinction.
That's right, and that will become pretty evident on a lot of the visualizations. We'll be able to see the interpolated SH max at every wellbore, and then you'll notice whenever we're looking at the gun barrel diagrams, those visualizations are oriented in this plane of SH max. So one of the other inputs that we consider is the horizontal overlap. If you think about two wells that might be parallel to one another, you're not always going to have the wells be the exact same length, or the wellhead locations might be slightly different, as in this example. And so in order to pick it up as an offset well, there's a horizontal overlap input. And so in this case, it did flag that next door well as a well that was offset because it had a greater horizontal overlap than the input. But you can see the well right above it, even though those wells do have some overlap, it was below that threshold, so it didn't flag it as an offset well.
Well explained, Kyle. This slide is really helpful to explain this concept. And then you can also see the sort of rhombus shape, that red plane. So you could see that, again, we're measuring that distance not perpendicular to the wellbore, but in that SH max direction.
Yep, that's right. And then the other thing to point out here is that there are some other wells to the east, or I guess to the west of this well that's highlighted. So it didn't pick up those wells as offset because it was outside of our distance threshold. So there's lots of inputs to control what you consider offsets for classifying the spacing as well as the parent-child relationships. So speaking of parent-child, if you think about the first production date for a given well, there's an input to control the sibling. So we call that Sibling Day Offset. And we use 90 days in this analysis, but you can shorten that or lengthen it. So any well that came online within 90 days of a given well is going to be considered a sibling. And then wells that came online before that will be parents. And then any well that came online after that is a child.
Yeah, so this is a really nice visualization, thinking about how that classification works. And sometimes it gets counterintuitive that, from one well's perspective, it's a sibling, but then somewhere else it's a parent and somewhere else it's a child. And so this I've always found really helpful.
That's right. And when we're looking at the details of a given well, all of the calculations are going to be in context of the well that's selected. And so that'll make more sense when we look at some of these examples, but you're right. The wells, wells might be a parent initially, and then later it's going to have children, and then those children might also become parents at some point in the future. So we keep track of all those different relationships. All right, so the Fracking Scenario dashboard, you can kind of think of this as a pad level summary, but for a given well, it'll pick up all of the offset wells based on your spacing criteria. And we've got a lot of information on this screen. For example, we can see the wells in 3D, those red planes that we saw on the previous screen, which show that potential well-to-well interaction. We show those planes in 3 dimensions on the left side, as well as the wellbore surveys, and then the horizon grids that have been loaded in. On the map view, you can see the well locations. We've got the SH max interpolated at each well bore, and then we've got these planes of potential interference between wells. And again, that's the size of those planes is defined by the inputs that you specify. Bottom right, we've got a gun barrel diagram, and this is oriented in the plane of SH max. So we can see everything is centered at the well that was selected. In this case, it's the well on the table that's labeled self, which is not highlighted. So that well is going to be right in the middle, and then we see the offset wells on either side of it. We show the production charts for all of these wells and then label the completion dates for the offset wells so that you can overlay these together and get a sense of when a child well came online or when an offset well came online, did it have a material impact on the production for a given well. And then finally at the bottom, the summary table is going to show every well in this analysis, the relationship to the active well. So this one's got several children and then one parent. We've got the completion date and then all of the distances between wells.
And so we'll see live when Kyle clicks through, but all of these different elements are interactive. You can make selections on the gun barrel diagram and then see the appropriate production charts highlighted and so on.
Yep, yeah, so this is a really popular page because it shows you a lot of information on one screen and it's very interactive. All right, so I won't spend too much time on this because it's really not the focus. It's kind of the end result though, is running economics using our economic development project app. So with this tool, you can bring in producing well profiles, you can model type curves, and then you can schedule out those type curves using a drilling schedule. And so from there, we can calculate full economics on the entire project, and you can even incorporate debt and interest charges if you want to model a loan. But then you've got all the standard inputs for costs like CapEx, OpEx, taxes. You can change the working interest for different wells, and even customize what you consider for different NGL streams. And so this is really nice because it integrates directly with the other apps inside Petro.ai. So once you generate a PDP forecast or generate a type curve, you can quickly run economics on them.
And the other piece that we think is important here is being able to bring in different price decks. Sometimes the world changes over the weekend if OPEC changes its posturing, for example. And so then rather than rerunning a whole scenario, instead we can just bring in a different price deck.
Yep, and we keep track of those in the price deck manager. So you can see on the left side, we've got a few different price decks that have been saved, and you can look at the details of a given price deck, and you can type in a date. You can have them changing monthly or annually or a combination of both. And so this is very much like Excel, where you can type into the cells and then even copy and paste back and forth. So if I go back one, so some of the visualizations inside the economic project is the inputs that you want to bring in. So that could be the PDP well forecast or the type curves, and then the price deck that you want to use. You can even model different price decks for different groups of wells. All of the inputs are controlled with these input buttons on the left side, and then we summarize the data in a variety of charts which are along these different tabs. So you can look at the revenue over time. We'll split out PDP and development wells. You can see cash flows before and after tax, scheme cash flows, and then the well counts.
Then if you'd like, you can download, on the left-hand bottom left corner there, you can export to CSV and then export to the finance teams who are going to do all their work in Excel.
That's right. Yeah. So building dashboards is very challenging because everyone, even within different groups at a given company, have different ways that they like to look at stuff. So we're never going to be able to make every single dashboard for every person, but we do want to make it very easy for you to get that data in a standardized format so you can integrate it into your Excel templates, your Spotfire projects, or Power BI. And so one way we do that is through these CSV downloads, but we also open up the backend data, both the calculated and the static data for access using maybe Python or R or Spotfire. So we've got different ways to connect to the database programmatically. All right, so last slide before we jump into the analysis, we highlight Petro Earth. So with Petro Earth, this is our fully immersive 3D visualization tool where you can view and interact with the wellbores. You can see the wellbore surveys, any horizon grids that you've loaded in, and then if you've got point sets, like in this case, we're visualizing microseismic, you can load the microseismic or any other point set in as well. This also acts as a really nice well search. You can search by well name and then quickly zoom to that well location. And then on the right side, you get a bunch of summary stats such as where the well's located, who operates it, where it is relatively within the formation, what's the EUR for the latest forecast, what are some of the well spacing calculations. So we summarize a lot of information for each well on that right panel. All right, so next we're gonna jump into the analysis. I guess I can pause here to see if, Anthony, do we have any questions come through yet?
Yeah, this is Michael. I'm not seeing any questions at this moment, so I think you can keep going.
All right, sounds good. So I just pulled my browser across. Richard, I wanna make sure you can see that.
Yeah, sure can.
Awesome. Okay, so like we said, we're gonna focus mostly in Loving County just because it's got some really good examples of parent wells that later had children wells infilled. So we can see in this map, we're bringing in these different data types such as the wellbore surveys, the well locations. These black lines at the top are the location and orientation of SH max. And so for a given area, you might have lots of these measurements, you might only have a few, but what we're doing is interpolating that SH max orientation at every wellbore, which is what you can see with these green lines.
So that's a weighted nearest neighbors, is that right?
Inverse distance weighted.
Inverse distance weighted. Okay, got it.
All right, so if we go back to our summary tab, we got the map view on the left side, but we've got a couple of summary tables which really quantify and classify the well spacing and well relationships. So if we start at the top right, we've got a table summarizing each one of the wells in this group. Now we've got about 1,000 wells in this eastern portion of Loving County. And so we can get some really good information about each one of these wells, such as when it was completed, and then the calculated number of children, parents, and siblings. And so these tables are really interactive. It's easy to sort them. I can select the well and see where it's located on the map. So as I'm clicking around, you can see these wells being highlighted. So what we wanted to do is find wells that have children but don't have any parent wells themselves. So for example, this well here, it's got 13 children. It doesn't have any parent wells. So we know that when it was drilled, it was originally drilled unbounded because this well doesn't have a parent itself. Another way that we could think about this is if we were looking for child wells, maybe we want to sort the parents column, and we can see that this well's got 17 parents, this one's got 12 parents. So we know that these wells that don't have any children, but do have parents, that this would be a child well. Some other things that we classify is the interval that it's landing in. We can see that these are in the top wolf camp. We've got some third Bone Spring. So based on the horizon grids that were input, we're gonna classify the zone that each wellbore is landing in, and then a relative percentage in that zone. So distance from relative placement from bottom to top.
And again, so this is with data subscription data. So these formation grids aren't as granular as you would have access to internally, but Petro.ai does a good job of classifying even with this lower resolution data set.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so you could we only classify the top of the wolf camp, but you could be pretty clever with the percent and zone if you wanted to classify wolf camp A, wolf camp B. But of course, if you have your own horizon grids where you've already delineated those, then these labels would be replaced with the labels of your horizon grids.
Yep.
So the numbers here, the classification for number of children, parents, and siblings, that's again defined with the input settings. So these input settings are controlled for this particular scenario, which we've called well spacing, Eastern Loving County. And so we left this pretty wide open, but you can tighten this up if you wanted to say, 5,000 feet. We think that it's more like 2,000 feet or 3,000 feet for wells to be considered offsets of each other.
Yeah, again, that's that open input control concept.
Mm-hmm. And then if we zoom in on some of these pads, we can see these planes. These are the potential planes of interaction between wells. And that's gonna be, the distance between these wells are gonna be summarized in the bottom table. So for each well in our well summary table, we've got an active well and then any of its offsets. So for this pad that I've selected, we can see, here's the Guadalupe, and the offset well is the red draw 292H. The completion date for that active well was in 2018. This one the offset well started producing about a year before, 227 days exactly. And then we classify the distances between wells. So for all of these well pairs, we can see where they're located on the map. We can click on them and then see the details in this table below. So what we wanted to focus on was finding a parent well and then looking at the impact of the child well infill development. And so this well right here, this red draw well, is pretty interesting because it was an early, it's been producing for about 6 or 7 years. It was drilled in 2015 and later had 11 children wells drilled off to the west. And it's also unbounded on one side. So we can see, does the impact of these wells to the west have any production impact? It's also interesting because it's near some of these other leases that look like they've just been held by production. You can see, solo wellbore here. So lots of open acreage to the east. And so once we select this well, we can edit the details, or we can view the summary by launching an action. And that's part of the connected analytics, is being able to select a well and then launch an action to do something else with it. So what we're loading up here is that well that we selected, which is the red draw 3H. And it's also going to bring in the offset wells nearby. So for those 11 children wells, it's going to pull those into this dashboard, and we can see our red draw 3H. And then it's offset children in the table. We can see that all of these are labeled as child. And then the distances between the wells. So earlier when I mentioned on this summary page, all of the calculations are relative to the active well. This table is showing that exact thing, where this is the well that was selected, but all of these other child wells have a relationship with this 3H well, and we can see the relationship and the distances between those wells. So I might want to find, where are the wells that are most near vertically, or which ones are closest horizontally. You can use the table sorting to find those, or you can look at the gun barrel and see, okay, right here on the east side of this pad, here's our parent well. And then to the west, we can select these and see that they've been infilled over the last couple of years.
So while we're on this page, Kyle, do you want to look at the 3D view next, or do you want to talk through the production performance of that parent?
Yeah, let's look at the 3D. So on the left side, we've got the parent well, which is the purple well here. And we can see the horizon grids, or the formations around the well. And then we can see the wellbore surveys for these 11 child wells. So I can make this a little bit bigger, and we can really interact with it in 3 dimensions. And so we can see that with these planes, this is the likely planes of interaction between wells, again, based on those input controls. So if you don't want, if you don't want it to flag a well that's 2 or 3 zones away, we could have really tightened up that vertical offset, and then these wells wouldn't have been considered offsets. Another way that we can visualize this in 3D is by selecting it. This well now becomes my active selection. And we can, again, launch an action. This is part of the connected analytics. And then for that different data type, I can select the well and then view the well in Petro Earth. So that launches a new browser tab, and it's going to open up the Petro Earth app. And this is where we can really interact with this data in a really rich way in 3 dimensions. So you can see all of this stuff is loading live. It's all browser based. It's all very performant. And you don't have to have any special hardware on your machine to run it. All right, so here's our red draw 3H. That's the parent well that we were just looking at. And I can zoom around and see that this well is off to the east. There's really no development around it, but then over here to the west, this is where we've got our infill child development wells.
Yeah, that's a helpful view there, Kyle.
Yep, so we can manipulate the camera. We can look top down. I can spin it around and use kind of the gun barrel view. And then we can also layer on our formation planes. If we wanted to see the surfaces, we can define where we're slicing these grids. So maybe we want to cut some of the, let's flip this around. So maybe we want to cut our planes here and here. And now we can see these formation grids along with the well bores.
No, that's fantastic. And so another piece that I really like here is that most of the time when people think about data browsing and well browsing, they imagine folder trees and structures and things like that. But our view is that those sort of folder structures just lend themselves to the siloed data problem, where you have different data types stored in different folders. We think it's much more intuitive to select an individual well or select a group of wells, a pad, and then launch different actions depending on, contextually, whether you've selected a single well or a group. So from here, you can see on the right-hand side, different statistics about the well spacing, about the, production history of that well, and so on.
So we selected one of those. Go ahead, Richard.
And so I was also going to mention, if you wanted to share this view with me, that's easy to do, in this era of remote work. It's as easy as copying and pasting that URL, dropping that into Teams or Slack or Outlook or something. And then when I click on that same link, I'm presented with this exact view of the same data that Kyle's looking at.
Yep, that's right. So all of the links are unique to the page that you're on. You can see that there's lots of IDs in here, so it's very easy to share these things. And another way that we could also share this with each other, if I go back to our summary page, so I could copy the link and send it to Richard. I've also noticed that he is inside this analysis with me. So on the top toolbar, kind of like when you're collaborating in Word, you can see other people that are working in that document. So we show you who's working inside this workspace with you. And I could make a comment and say Richard, oops, not Jared, Richard got.
Yeah, Jared would reply. Yeah, it might take him a few minutes longer than for me, though.
Yeah, looks like this well was hit pretty hard. And then so he would get a notification in the top right corner, and he could see that I was working on a frac kit analysis, and then he can join me directly on this page, and we can interact socially inside the context of this workflow, which is really helpful when you come back in a month or 2 months. You've got the history of what you were thinking about, what you were working on, and who is collaborating with you.
And so I can reply back to that. So that's populated now on my machine here, which I know you guys can't see. So I'll just type a comment back. Okay, and that should pop into your machine. Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, I can see that negative frac kit. So you also tagged it, and anytime you tag something, it's going to save the page that you tagged it on. So you can search for it in the top toolbar by searching this hashtag neg frac kit.
So for example, if we were doing a broader project and we were classifying these different interference pairs as positive frac hits or negative frac hits, hashtags are sort of a natural way to classify things through these comments, and then we could collect lots of different well groups that we've tagged in that manner.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. When you think about analytics, you're typically thinking about data and then the problems you're trying to solve. But one of the important things about analytics is the analysis and the comments and the things you were thinking about when you're performing them. So being able to contextualize it, add in your own user metadata, I think is really important to any analytic workflow.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, go ahead, Kyle. I'm worried that we've taken a few minutes away from the production degradation, but it's just really excited to share the social features and the 3D views with the group.
Yeah, so let's get back to this. So if we look at our parent well, just eyeballing it, we can see it had a pretty flat decline early on, and if we were just to eyeball that out into the future, the most recent production looks like it has a steeper decline. And so we can start to select these wells on the gun barrel and see, okay, here's 4 children wells that came online more recently. even a little bit further away, further to the west. And I'm guessing that this pad was originally developed kind of outside in to deal with this potential frac kit problem. And so if we select these wells, we can see when they come online, maybe there was a production uplift, and then later we can see that there was a pretty significant decline change. So having the ability to quickly select the wells, see them on the production profiles, even labeling those completion dates on this plot makes it really easy to pull out these trends. So we can look at the gas, the water, but like I said before, if you've got higher frequency data types like wellhead pressure or high frequency rates, those can be brought in as well. So the next step was to look at the decline curve if we pretended like this didn't happen. So if we were just to fit a decline curve through this early portion, and then look at the decline curve after and compare those two scenarios. So I've saved a link over to our forecast for that well. And so I can look at, here's our forecasts, Rudd Draw 3H parent well post infill. So we've actually incorporated both decline curves into this one page. And so that links us to our forecast page where we've went ahead and fit a decline curve before that frac hit, which is what you can see with this black line. So if I put my cursor there, you can see this is the parent well pre-infill decline curve. And then we've also updated this post-infill and fit a decline curve through that more recent production section.
So when we're thinking about sort of the price of this frac hit, right, and quantifying that economic impact, we're thinking about sort of the area between these two curves, and then thinking about the forecast price decks, discounting that back to a dollar value today.
Yep, that's right. So it's really the area between the curves, and then applying some cost assumptions and price assumptions to figure out what that value is. So all these different apps are available through the dropdown, so you can kind of get a sense of what's in there. So we could go straight to the economic development project. We could also launch some actions to connect these things together. I could launch an action on this forecast scenario to run an economic development project. But just to save a few clicks, again, I've put in these hyperlinks, and we can look at the economics of the parent well pre-infill. So that's the black decline curve here. So as this is loading, this is now the economics application. We can see the input is our forecast 3H parent well pre-infill, so that's the decline curve. And then we've also brought in one of those price decks. We showed a screenshot of that in the slides, but this is just a flat $40 oil price deck, just to keep things simple. We've also simplified the cost options here, so 100% working interest, 100% revenue interest, and then haven't considered any taxes or CapEx for drilling. So basically we're just applying the production, multiplying that times the commodity price to get a relative comparison pre and post frac hit. Okay, so if we look at the production profile, here's our decline curve that's pretty smooth. We don't have any change in the shape of it. And if we look at the summary, I can zoom in here and look at if we were to drill this well and not considering any sort of drilling cost, obviously, we would have an NPV of $19 million. I think I went too far in. And then if we go over to our schedule, we can see when this well started, and then at the time, from this start date into the future, we've got a reserves oil of about 700,000 barrels. So that's what it would have produced if it didn't have this frac kit and if it followed our decline curve trend.
And that's likely the reserves that have been booked and so on before this infill development.
Yep, that's right. So again, about 700,000. And then if we go to the summary, we can see the NPV is about 19 million. So some of these other things are empty because we didn't model any sort of CapEx, so there's no rate of return, there's no return on investment, and then we didn't model any sort of loan with equity or anything like that. Okay, so the other economic project that we built was post infill development. So if we think back to our type curve, that was, we were still considering the production history, but then that infill development causing the change in decline curve. So I've put a link in for that one as well. So we've got our pre-infill, which is what we just looked at, and then our economics post-infill. And so it's a different scenario. We could have just swapped out the inputs and rerun it. but we've got our forecast scenario 3H, zoom out just to see that, post infill. So this is our forecast after that frac hit. And if we look at the revenue, this is indicative of our production profile. So we had one decline curve, we saw that uptick, but then we've got a change in decline curve after the frac hit, which we can see on the production profiles as well. So what we really want to know is, if we're looking at the NPV, how does it change? So if we consider the well before, it was about 19 million. After this frac hit, with our new decline curve, we're to about 16 million of NPV. And then if we click over to the schedule, we can see we're still starting at the same date, but the reserves have dropped down to about 450,000.
Yeah, so in this case, when we're budgeting for future infill development wells, you know, we would want to layer in an additional, potentially, if we think that we're looking at an analog, you know, analog of the geology, that it may be appropriate to price in an additional $3 million of cost while you're budgeting that infill development project.
Yeah, so this is an interesting example, but it's certainly not the only one. We can explore different examples, but a different one that we found that we thought was pretty interesting was, if you're thinking about the order of development. So we flagged one, this is in the Midland Basin actually, where we've got an attic well, which is at the top of the zone, and then later had infill development below. So thinking about the vertical interference, not only the horizontal interference. And so I just want to pull this one up just to show, you know, that red draw pad is certainly not an isolated use case, but we could use these tools and we could use this workflow to find other examples where you've got a parent well that had lots of infill development around it, and where we see a significant decline in production.
Yeah, so this one's interesting. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I get confused thinking about parent and children and offset, who's offset where, and but then thinking about that in 2 dimensions is, you know, one thing, getting the nomenclature right. But then when you add this third dimension, it gets even more confusing. And so I like using this term attic basement parent-child pairs. And so in this case, you know, help me make sure I don't have this reverse, Kyle. Yeah, so this is an attic parent with basement children, yeah, coming in underneath.
Yep, that's right. And a pretty classic wine rack development too.
And then even if we were going to look at those group of wells, Kyle, that the group of infill wells, child wells that fall off kind of as a group. And so do these share anything in common?
So let's select these. So I think these were the ones that were at the bottom of the stack. No, the better ones were at the bottom. So these were kind of like this middle layer.
Okay, yeah, so that's, I mean, interesting that there's this sort of interference called a sandwich interference or something, that this middle zone, right, once we're thinking about this in 3D space, right, you know, what these interference patterns really look like. And it's not obvious just from, you know, map views, and it's not obvious just from the timing, right, but this is something that we need to classify in, you know, vertically from the map. We need to classify it, you know, in 3D space. We need to classify them in time. There's a lot of, you know, connected analytics to do in order to see this pattern emerge.
Yep, that's right. And again, you know, we're not providing the data. So if you've got more granular grids, you'd probably classify these as Wolfcamp A. These might be Wolfcamp B. These could be lower Sprayberry, maybe you've got a middle Sprayberry. So just depending on the data that you have and the granularity of it, then it just enhances the analysis. Anything else you wanted to cover here before we jump back to the slides, Richard?
No, this was excellent. It looks like we're coming up right on 12:15 here, so we'll have some time for questions.
All right, so just to quickly wrap this up, so we looked at this red draw pad where it was a parent well that was drilled in 2015 and then later had these 11 wells infilled off to the west. And we saw a pretty significant change in production profile, and we're able to quantify that as about a $3 million NPV change and about $235,000, barrels in reserves change.
Yeah, we're not at $1 a barrel yet. We're back off that bottom. And this is another piece that we're really excited about. To this SPE Permian Basin Data Analytics Group, you may have seen an email granting this group early access. But one thing that has the world's really changed over the last 5-10 years in the way that people interact with software and the way they make purchasing decisions. And so if you think about Dropbox or even Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic, Zoom had a free tool that you used, and that's how you sort of got acclimated with Zoom before you made an enterprise purchase. And this is really the way that people like de-risking investments now and de-risking the way that they're going to do their work. And so we want to adopt that same view with Petro.ai. We want to give potential users a chance to bring Petro.ai into their own environment, into their own workflows for free. And so what we're delivering is a 1 gigabyte environment to anybody who'd like to participate. We will create user profiles. We can give you example TGS data, or if you'd like to deliver some internal data to our team, we're happy to ingest that. But then we create sort of a sandbox for your company where you can use some of this connected analytics functionality in your own environment. And then from there, if you'd like to load more data into the system, then we can grow with you. So this is something that we're really excited about in 2021. And in the era of remote work, we think that Petro.ai is a really unique way to help connect remote teams together to allow them to collaborate. And the one other piece that I didn't mention is this free 1 gigabyte Petro.ai environment is available, but it's an unlimited number of users. So we're happy for you to have, anyone in your company have the ability to log in and look at the software rather than limiting the adoption of the tool by number of seats. Instead, the way that we will make money in the future is as new data types are loaded into the system, then we would start to charge for new data types that get loaded in. So if it's competing for time in your workflow, more and more people want to load data into the system to do their work, then we feel like we've earned a right in your tech stack, and that's when you would move from the community edition to an enterprise edition. But so happy to provide any more details about this, and this is something we're really excited to get going.
Yep, and just one thing to point out there, it's not a trial, it is a tier that can be used indefinitely into the future.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So 1 gig is the level of analytics that's appropriate for your team, then we're happy to stand one up for you and let you do your work in Petro.ai community.
All right, so that's the end of our presentation. We're happy to stick around and answer any questions or review anything that we covered today.
Hi, this is Michael. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I'll go ahead and start off with some questions of my own. And while I'm asking them, I'll remind the listeners that you can ask questions by either typing them in the chat, the question box, or raising your hand. And if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you and you'll be able to ask the question yourself. So hope the audience thinks of some questions while I ask some of my own. So yeah, I just had a question on the spacing, and I'm not sure you said this. Does it tell you can you see what the current spacing is, and also maybe what the spacing used to be? I'm just thinking, maybe 2 wells were drilled 1,200 feet apart, and then there was an infill right in between them at 600 feet with it, and then they got frac hit. Is there a way to see kind of the progressions or the changes of spacings over time? If you drill, offsetting it or above it or below it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think the easiest way to do that would be there's a filter that you could apply on either the completion date or first production date. And so you could pick a period of time and see what was the spacing for this well at that time. And so it would pick up, for the parent well, maybe there was 3 wells infilled at one point in the past, and then later on there was another 3 wells infilled. So by changing that completion date filter, you'd be able to see at a given date how many wells were there that were offset, and then what was the distance between those wells. And then, you could move that date filter again and see the newer wells coming online, and then see what the spacing is for those.
Okay, great. And is there a way to be able to visualize that on the gun barrel? It seemed like it was just showing all the wells. Is there a way to, when you make the filter in the table, also filter the gun barrel that way as well to kind of see that?
The gun barrel, let's see, it would pick up the wells that are offset. But there's not a way to filter those on completion date. So you could change the well group that was in the analysis. Maybe you just want to look at, so if I go back to our initial scenario, so we use this Eastern Loving County group, but you could say, Eastern Loving County wells completed prior to 2018. So that could be the basis. And then this would show the filtered view based on that completion date.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Another thing that you could do, so I work a lot in Spotfire for prototyping and just like diving deeper into the analysis. And so we've got a way to export this directly into Spotfire, and then you've got a lot of controls over the filters and different charts that you can make.
Awesome, great. How do you, I guess, how is that brought into Spotfire? Is that just like a kind of like, I guess, similar to the add-ons, I guess, when y'all were formerly called Roots.ai, kind of a Spotfire add-on?
No, so you don't even need, there's no additional software. It's just an API call. So we've got a Python script that runs and grabs the data from the database. So you really just need a couple of ID tokens that grant you authorization to access the data, and then some of these IDs for like the workspace that you're in, and then the Fracking Scenario ID. And so you can just input those into input boxes, and then it'll run a Python script to grab the data. And then another thing that we're releasing in the next version, in a week or two, you'll see a button down here that says CSV export. And so there'll be 2 tables that we're exporting, a CSV with a well summary and then a CSV with these well pair summaries.
Great. Thanks for answering that. I'm still not seeing any questions from the audience. Anthony, did you have any questions you want to ask?
Yeah, I guess so. So it looks like you mentioned earlier, like frac hits, production, a bunch of different like modules. I can't remember which term you called it, but like production forecasting. How difficult is it to go about making a new one? Like say if Chevron liked using this, and they wanted to build another workflow in there. How does people go about doing that, or changing the workflows that you have built? Is it easy to go in there and modify all the setup for companies, or?
Yeah, so if you were to start fresh, you wouldn't see this input group and you would see these charts be blank. And so you would just go in and add an input. And so if I wanted to, let's say create let's start with a group of wells. So let's say that I find some wells that I think are interesting and I want to forecast them. So I can select them, and then I can see that I've got 10 wells selected over here. And so I can launch an action on those wells, create a group, and launch this, create this group. So I'll call, new group 10 wells. So these are the 10 wells that I'm interested in. And then once you've got the group, you can do lots of different things with the group. So maybe I want to create a forecast scenario. I can do that by using an action on the group. I could create a forecast report. I could create a type curve. I could view the production. We can see them in Petro Earth. So there's lots of different things. So if I wanted to just create a new forecast scenario, I can launch the action. Hopefully you give them better names than I do, but just to click through it pretty quickly. So in 2 clicks, you can make the group, and then from the group, you can build this forecast. So the workflows are totally customizable. The apps are interconnected based on the inputs that you're using. So we've got the input group for 10 wells. We can see the forecast building in the background. And then if I want to go edit these, I can select the wells and then launch an action. again, the actions connect the different workflows together and look at those decline curve models.
Yeah, Kyle's probably the fastest gun in the West clicking through that. But what Petro.ai was doing in the background was auto forecasting each individual well, coming up with statistics about the EUR, displaying statistics about that well group. And now what we've done is we've clicked into one of those 10 wells that if we decided that the auto forecast engine, we needed to tweak it, for example, this is where you could inspect and make sure that this individual forecast, is sensible.
All right, awesome. And then I guess about the forecasting, do you use like allocated or well tested, or what do you, can you toggle between that?
It's whatever you specify. So
Okay.
we use, the forecast runs on monthly production. So whatever you provide for monthly production, whether it's allocated or allocated by one of your data providers or internally.
Awesome, that's very cool.
Yeah, and we think something like this would be convenient for A&D groups, for example. So if you had a house view, like could you look at the forecast sort of bookends, Kyle? So if your team had a house view of what the B factor should be and what the decline rate should be, you can kind of set up the rules for what the auto forecast should look like that align with your internal view rather than just using the ones that the investment bank gives you in the presentation. And so once you apply your own sort of internal metrics on this, then Petro.ai will fit these new decline wells according to the parameters that you've set up.
All right,
and then,
awesome.
Then we save that as a different scenario. So it could be a bull case and a bear case, that kind of thing. And so here we've just kicked off another one with these new parameters.
Yeah, the same thing would apply, if we wanted to do a frac hit. So now that we've generated this forecast scenario, maybe for these wells, we wanted to look at the well spacing. So we could launch an action to look at this frac hit scenario. And I'll keep my clever naming convention of 10 wells. And so that's going to take us to a new app. So now we're in the well spacing app that we demonstrated today. We could put in our settings for the spacing constraints and all of that, and then build a scenario here. So again, that's kicking off a job. This is running on our Petro.ai cloud server, and it's going to run all the calculations, and then you can visualize the results.
Yeah, so this, I mean, this is pretty impressive that we were able to do this sort of on the fly, pick 10 random wells, and so we're really proud of this functionality, and that you can, to your question, Anthony, when you have a new workflow or new inputs or a new scenario we want to run, how quickly can I do that? And you don't have to go herd the cats and get different people to do new exports or move things from Spotfire into a different tool or get a new Aries export or something. Here it's all connected in one spot.
That's pretty awesome. And then I guess no one else has a question. So you said you're connected data. You said that. So it's like, say if we want to get you sort of be more proactive and like these frac kits, can you set up something where like if you see something weird, like say water rates jump or something, there's offset frac nearby or pressure spike, can you set up like alerts using your platform? Like if we hooked you up all the SCADA and all that stuff, would you be able to do some like proactive alert emails, say, hey, there's something going on here? Or is this more like a reactive after the fact? I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Yeah, so that makes sense. There's not an alerting, so you can like set a criteria and flag alerts. But some of our clients have automated those workflows by using the API. So everything, all the buttons I'm clicking can be automated through a script just by making API calls. So some things we've done in the past to take some of the manual clicks out of it is writing these scripts. And let's say you've got a Python script that's running every day to quantify well spacing and frac kits. That's where you could build in that logic of within Python, say, okay, we're looking at our production profile. If there's a spike in pressure that exceeds this value for this period of time, send me an email. So inside Petro.ai, there's not a method for setting up those alerts today, but you've got the access to all of the data and can build that logic in other applications and get those alerts.
Okay, awesome.
And then just to, I mean, maybe riff on that a little bit more, Anthony. So then, it's a question of what are you connecting to at the edge? And so we have various partnerships with service providers so that, we can automate those connectors, so that data is populated into Petro.ai quickly. Again, in a similar process, with the same way an end user would query the API to get, custom alerting. Through our partnerships with these service providers and other data providers at the edge, they're using the API to load data in.
Okay, that's awesome. I know that's like seems to be the thing that people are looking at, is like how to get them managed by exception using alerting and all that, because there's so much data coming in. They can do that, and people try to do less with more. So it's so I was just asking, it'd be cool.
Yeah, that's exactly the vision, right? Rig count's going up, right? But head count probably isn't. So it's same number of people doing more work. And so what can you do? You can automate the mundane stuff. You can automate that data manipulation work so that you can be doing knowledge work. I mean, that's what the nature of managed by exception is. And so that's exactly why Petro.ai exists, is we know what a headache it is to manage these disparate data sets, how hard it is to build these connected views. And so we just want to give people tools so that they can do more important work, and with a risk-free way to get started with Petro.ai community.
That's pretty awesome. Let's see who's on the line. I don't see any more questions.
Well, we really appreciate you having us, and thanks so much for letting us share what we're up to. This group's always been so generous to us, and we really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. And also look forward to hearing Kyle talk next month about at that conference where you guys are presenting at. That Ronnie and I don't think he said anything, but Ronnie's part of our data analytics study group, and him and I are sort of help planning this one. So looking forward to hearing Kyle talk again about there. And yeah, I need to mention that before, just between you and I, but I got the set information so I can get IHS data so I can test this out. I'm looking forward to doing that, getting in there and playing with that production forecasting, because I know personally our workflows are kind of tedious here with the whole forecasting thing, and I think your tool would help significantly. So I'm gonna keep trying to push that.
Yeah, great. Well, we'd love to help. We'd love to help.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
All
thanks.
right, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.